Some of our long-term fans out there may have forgotten what's happened over the course of the war, and some of you newer fans may wish to catch up. So we do a recap special every 3 months so you can get up to speed, and this is one of them. I'm Indy Nidell. Welcome to a Great War recap special covering the months February, March, and April 1918. As February began, the shakeups and machinations in the British Army High Command continued. Much of this resulted from Prime Minister David Lloyd George wanting to get rid of Commander Sir Douglas Haig, but being unable to just fire him, so he was trying to get rid of everyone around him. Several men had been removed in January, but the big fish would be Chief of Staff Wally Robertson. He was finally maneuvered out and resigned in mid-February, and Sir Henry Wilson would be the new British Army Chief of Staff. If you dig into that situation, it may seem a bit of a mess, but nothing compared to the mess that was the Russian peace negotiations with the Central Powers at Brest-Litovsk. Leon Trotsky was now leading the Russian delegation and was trying to drag the negotiations out. The Germans were losing patience, however, and had by now proposed a new border that would deprive Russia of Lithuania, most of Poland, and western Latvia. The Austrians were also antsy, but mostly because their foreign minister, Count Chernin, really wanted to get it all over with and bring in as much Ukrainian grain as he could for his near-starving nation from a separate peace with Ukraine. Trotsky was dragging things out because he and other Russian Bolshevik leaders thought a revolution in Germany and Austria was imminent, but though there were mutinies and uprisings, revolution just wasn't going to happen. In the peace with Ukraine, the home region of Poland was given to Ukraine, and this caused the Poles in Austria-Hungary to blow up, and they were now opposed to Emperor Karl, and had been one of his last pillars of support. This sabotaged things with the Bolsheviks, who had their own designs on Ukraine, and Trotsky walked out of Brest-Litovsk declaring no war, no peace, and that Russia would not accept annexationist peace terms. So, on the 18th, the Eastern Front came to life as the German army marched on Russia and Ukraine. There was pretty much no one around to stop them since the Russian army had mostly gone home. So Lenin and Trotsky said they'd accept the peace offer. This was too late, though, and the Germans demanded hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of land and industry. They also refused to stop advancing on Moscow and Petrograd until the new terms were accepted and were still on the move as the month ended. This wasn't the only February action in the field, though. The Transcaucasian Federation, made up of what is now Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan, would spend the winter negotiating a peace treaty and new borders with the Ottoman Empire. But even while that was going on, the Ottomans were advancing toward the Caucasus and occupying Erzincan and Trabzon by the end of the month. But though there had been no big action on the Western Front in February, that doesn't mean it wasn't being planned. German Army Quartermaster General Erich Ludendorff was planning the largest offensive of the war, beginning with Operation Michael, which would begin in late March. By then, Germany would have 191 divisions on the Western Front, giving them numerical superiority there for the first time since 1914. He would also be using the tried-and-true Hutier assault tactics and Bruckmüller artillery tactics to try and break the front wide open. He was doing all of this now to try and win the war before the Americans could arrive in force with the summer. As March arrived, the desperate Russians signed the peace treaty of Brest-Litovsk to stop the advancing Germans, and its humiliating terms crippled the new Bolshevik nation, depriving it of much of its resources, population, and land. Germany now controlled territory from the North Sea to the Black Sea. No one had done that since the Romans. They would have to pacify the occupied territory, though, which would take a great many troops, and fight not only Bolsheviks, but also groups like the Czechoslovak Legion, who beat the Germans at Bakhmach in March before heading east for Siberia. The Ottomans continued occupying territory that month too, taking and burning Erzurum. They also managed to stop a British advance on Amman and Es-Salt in Palestine, and the British retreated behind the River Jordan. The gigantic German offensive kicked off March 21st along a huge chunk of the Western Front. It literally smashed through the British lines and within days had taken dozens of kilometers of land and inflicted tens of thousands of casualties. The war in the West was a war of motion for the first time since 1914. However, the advance was so quick that it was soon outrunning its supply lines and artillery. and the land taken was land bereft of strategic value. Also, French and British reserves were finally pouring in. Still, by the end of the month, as the Paris guns, the largest artillery ever made, began to rain shells down on Paris from 100 kilometers away, Germany threatened to drive a wedge between the British and French forces. They crossed the Somme and the Quozark Canal, and the Allies pleaded with the Americans to put all available troops into the line to stem the tide. President Wilson said okay, but Commander John Pershing adamantly refused to do so, preferring to wait until they had the strength to fight as an American army. And April rolled in. Operation Michael began to run out of steam, and Ludendorff had failed to take the vital Allied rail center of Amiens, and the German army didn't have the cavalry or tanks necessary to exploit breakthroughs. There were also many scenes of discipline breaking down as advancing Germans came across supplies and provisions that had been scarce for 4 years. They had taken nearly 100,000 prisoners, in addition to causing over 200,000 casualties and 1,200 square miles of land, but had left their vaunted defense lines and lengthened their overall line to do so. But as Michael came to an end, Ludendorff was already trying again with Operation Georgette, the Battle of La Lys up in Flanders. This too had instant success, breaking the Portuguese and British front lines, but over the following couple of weeks, it would unfold much as Michael did. Large rapid advances, but still unable to take its primary targets, in this case Hazebrouck Rail Junction and then the Flanders Hills. There was a fear for a while among the British that they would be driven back to the Channel ports and even off the continent, but by the end of the month it was apparent that this wasn't going to happen. Ludendorff tried further attacks towards Amiens, which resulted in the first ever tank versus tank battle April 24th at Villiers-Bretonneux, but April ended without the massive German battles taking major prizes. They also took over 300,000 casualties total by this time, which was fewer than the Allies, but still a tenth of their overall strength on the whole Western Front. But as May began, the attacks continued. In order to finally consolidate their forces better, the Allies chose Ferdinand Fache as Supreme Commander of all Allied forces this month. Some of those forces would mount an amphibious operation against Ostend and Zeebrugge, hoping to block the canal entrances there and sabotage German submarine traffic, but the operation was unsuccessful. In Palestine, Lawrence of Arabia and the Arab Revolt tried and failed to take Man, but occupied close to 100 kilometers of the Hejaz Railway, which was a big coup, for that railway was a major supply line for the Ottomans. Further north, the Ottomans took Batum and Kars and continued their march towards the Caucasus. And in other news from April, Britain formed the Royal Air Force, the world's first independent air force. Also in the skies, the Great Red Baron met his fate, shot down over the Somme. And Austrian Emperor Karl faced a political crisis when it was discovered he had plotted to perhaps abandon his German ally and seek a separate peace. His authority and the cohesion of his empire were now eroding monthly. And here we are on May 1st, the International Workers' Day. And what was happening to them? Well, in Ukraine, they were abruptly about to be deprived of the fruits of their labor, as Germany declared a military dictatorship in order to gather the Ukrainian harvest for its own. And that sucks for those workers, but by comparison, they had it good for the moment. For what were the rest of the workers of Europe doing? Well, they were fighting and bleeding and dying for their nations on the battlefields month after month and wondering what sort of world they would come home to if the war ever ended. If you'd like to see more of our recap specials, you can check out our entire recap playlist right here. You should also like us on Facebook, and you should follow us on Twitter, because Flo posts all kinds of cool things. Don't you, Flo?
Yes.
You can say that louder.
Yes.
Yes, that's Flo. All right, don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.